Hello, everybody. We're going to talk today about the topic mastering DevOps efficiency. We're going to talk about advanced cost management, hybrid cloud strategies, and cutting-edge tools and the solutions available in the market today. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Gourav Kapoor. I'm Director for Cloud Architecture and FinOps at DevTech. I've been in the industry for more than 18 years now. I'm based in Ottawa. Worked across different organizations, held different titles and roles, pretty much around cloud architecture, DevOps, and FinOps over the period of years. Before I go and start the topic about the mastering DevOps efficiency, I just want to make sure that I make it clear that all of whatever I'll be sharing will be on my personal opinions, knowledge, and expertise in the field of DevOps. None of this would or does represent the official positions, policies, or the endorsements of the company I work for, right? So the discussion is essentially intended to reflect my experience and insights into the DevOps domain. All right, so with that, let's look at the agenda. The agenda is we're going to talk a little bit about the introduction of DevOps. What is DevOps? We're going to then delve deeper or go a little bit deeper into the DevOps efficiencies. We're going to look at the practices, and then we're going to pivot to some of the cost management discussions, right? So what's the role of FinOps in DevOps? What are the tools available? What are the certain tactics we have available in the market? And with that, we're going to talk about the power of hybrid cloud, right? How DevOps play a little bit of role in there as well. And then last but not the least, we're going to look at some of the most commonly available or most commonly used next generation DevOps tools across the whole pipeline. And with that, let's look at what is DevOps, right? So I have a Wikipedia definition of DevOps right on the screen for you here, right? I'm not going to necessarily read that, but in my opinion, what I consider DevOps is essentially, and I often compare that to a relay race, right, with a smoothly passing baton, right? Now, this analogy helps us understand the core concept of DevOps, which is essentially all about collaboration and streamlined processes. So what used to happen, or in a traditional approach, or I would say pre-DevOps era, right? It's like a relay where one team, the developers, essentially creates the baton, which is essentially our software or the product, right? Then the another team, operations, takes it from there, right? So it's usually a sequential handoff, what you will see, right? And sometimes that handoff can be a bit rough, and I think we some of us probably can relate to that, or maybe more of us can relate to that, right? Now, with the introduction of DevOps, or in the DevOps era, things work a little bit differently, and that's where the collaboration and the partnership becomes very, very critical, right? Now, in this case, if you think about the same analogy here, right? So both teams, developers and operations, are like runners in the same relay race, right? They work together and ensure that the baton or the software passes between them seamlessly. Now, the idea is not to just essentially just pass the baton, which is the software in this case, right? The idea is to have an open communication. Idea is to pivot and adjust and be flexible and essentially hand it off with precision, right? So the teamwork, which essentially makes this whole entire race, which is the software development delivery process, much faster, efficient, and essentially less prone to the errors, right? So that's how I see DevOps, right? Essentially is a more of a collaboration and streamlined processes between development and operations, making sure that the software development and delivery process can be run efficiently and more faster. Now, if we understand a little bit about the history, right, I'm just showing a little bit of a timeline here, right? So between 2008 and 2010, the concept of DevOps emerged as like a transformative force in the technology sector, right? So it was a fundamental shift, which was seen as a fundamental shift, right? Much like, which is essentially the GIF I have on the screen here, is like discovering a new dance genre, right? Dance genre, right? Essentially, where the development and operations teams are now collaborating in harmoniously. And if we enter into the 2010 era, right, that's where I call it like, DevOps became or took the role of a blockbuster sequel where Docker, Kubernetes essentially took the center stage and orchestrating deployments and containerization, right? Now, this era technically helped us in taking, or I would say removing or dismantling silos, right, and introduced a more elegant approach or efficient approach to code development, to software delivery, and that made it much more faster and engaging, and I would say enjoyable as well, right? Now, oftentimes we're asked, like, okay, we understand that there's a development and the portion operations team are going to work collaboratively. But what is the need of the DevOps, right? That's often essentially the times I'm asked this question when I talk to different peers or different people in the industry as well, right? So I have categorized this into the three different sections, if you'll see here, which is faster time to market, right? How DevOps essentially helps us in achieving that. What kind of business value it brings for us, right? And the cost optimization piece of it, right? So I'm not going to go too deep into each of these, but if we spend a little bit of time into each of these sections, we'll understand like how DevOps is essentially all about the speed, right? Enabling rapid adaptation to market changes and quick innovation for customer satisfaction, right? Now, how we can reliably prioritize high quality updates? How can we make sure that every change which is going into the system or in the software development is safe and functional? How can we ensure that we can scale, right? We can manage infrastructure processes at a larger scale, making it easier to handle for our development, test, or even production environments, right? So, at the end of the day, right, the goal is essentially to deliver software, to deliver that product seamlessly at a speed, right, in a secure manner, right? And that's where now the security comes into the picture. We want to make sure that security does not become a bottleneck in delivering that, right? So that's why you have to take security also as a top priority, making sure that you can ingest like automated compliance policies, right? You can prevent errors and so on. And these are some of the sections right now. We cannot talk enough about the collaboration, which is essentially the heart of this, right? The effective teamwork and collaboration and between the DevOps, right? That will be fostering accountability and ownership in making sure that we can deliver all of these pieces which we just talked about, right? We can deliver software at speed. We can deliver software. We can make those changes at functional level in a rapid manner, right? We can make sure that the product we're delivering is highly reliable. The quality changes, the application changes, they are highly reliable. They allow us to scale. They allow us to make sure that our product or software is highly available, right? And last but not the least one here, right, is the cost optimization, right? How does it help in removing or minimizing, I would say, the downtime, right? There's all those automated processes, those automated tools, that all helps us in essentially achieving those business goals and which results in essentially saving money for the business or saving cost essentially for delivering that particular product. Now we understand that the need of the DevOps, right? We understand what is DevOps, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the DevOps practices here, right? All of these topics listed here pretty much are a huge topic in their own, right? So I wouldn't have enough time to essentially go into the deep of each of these topics. But microservices can be a big topic in its own, continuous integration and delivery as such, and so on is the cost optimization, right? So we're going to look at very high level on all of these pieces, right? And then we'll try to understand one of the frameworks, right? Again, among all the frameworks we have available, we're going to try to understand one of the frameworks, and then we will try to see how can we roll out this practice, right, in a particular organization, right? So now continuous integration here, right, and continuous delivery. So I'm going to give an example here, right? So think of continuous integration as that, the between your friends, like you're building a giant, I would say, Lego castle, right? Now each of us, right, has, or each of you essentially has your own Lego pieces to add to the structure, right? Now continuous integration is like that. Every time one of our friends creates a new Lego piece, they immediately attach it to the castle. And now this way, you always have the latest, most up-to-date castle. Now, if there's a problem with that piece, which has been attached to the castle, you catch it right away and fix it, right? And now take it in the example of software. CI means that every time a developer writes a new code, it automatically gets added to the project, checked for errors, and integrated into the larger software, right? So what does it do? It helps us essentially catch and fix problems early. So that's the core of the CI piece here, right? Now, if we take this to the next step to the continuous delivery here, right? Take the similar analogy of Lego Castle here. Now think of Lego Castle as a piece of art which you're going to display it in a museum, right? So now we have been building it one by one, those smaller pieces, right? We have been making sure those errors are caught at the early stages, right? So fixing those issues, adding new pieces. Now continuous delivery essentially means that delivering that castle, right? Um, let's think of it as delivering that castle or displaying that castle at an art museum, right? So in a nutshell, our castle is always ready to be displayed, right? Because we are making sure that we are adding those small pieces. We're making sure those pieces are error free. And if they are error, we are fixing it. That means my castle is always ready to be displayed, right? Now, if I take this in the example of software, right? CD means, or continuous delivery essentially means that my code is always in a state where it could be released to the users at any moment. But the key here is that we choose, right? Or you choose essentially to when to actually release it, right? And that flexibility ensures that we can deliver new features or bug fixes to users quickly with confidence, right? So to conclude this, the CI/CD portion of it, right, is that if I would put it in a simple terms, it's like building a Lego castle with friends where each new piece is added as soon as it's ready, and the completed castle is always ready for display, but we decide when to show it to the world, right? Now that approach essentially helps us that our software is continuously improved, tested, and ready for release, but at our convenience or at our discretion, when do we feel that the software is essentially ready to be released, right? Now, if we talk about microservices here, right? So I'm going to take another analogy for microservices, right? And we have often seen this debate between monolithic and microservices, and is that the right way to go into building the software? Is that the only way to go into the building the software, right? So what I say is that depends upon what level of the technology company you are, where you are, what type of software you're building, and what state you are, right? Are you rewriting some of the old legacy applications, or are you just building a new application from scratch, right? So that discussion in itself is a huge discussion and probably going to be out of the scope of this meeting or this presentation, right? So, but I'm going to just touch a little bit on the microservices here, right? So the way I think microservices is that that we are fixing a small part of our house or room essentially without rearranging the whole house, right? So microservices in software is essentially similar, that instead of building one big complicated application, what we do is we break it into a smaller independent services. Now, the benefit of that is that each service essentially will handle a specific task, a specific responsibility. Now, take an example of any application where you're logging into that application, or you're doing a search in an application. If we take an Amazon or some other applications like that, right? Now, each of these smaller applications, like user login, it could be its own service. The searching could be its own service. A payment gateway could be its own service, right? Now, there are a few benefits with this. It makes it easier for us to develop, test, and update different parts of the software without essentially disrupting the whole system. Um, and it also makes it easier for essentially us to fix those issues identified in independent services as well, right? So essentially, it's like the way of having a collection of smaller, manageable, you can call it a puzzle pieces or a microservices essentially, instead of having one giant and unwildly will the one service or one software as such, right? And then we have infrastructure as a code, which is essentially, I call it as a magic wand for our service, right? So that we're using the realm of tools we have available in the market and certain frameworks that we can ensure that we are able to deploy our services in a way, and servers or networks or the underlying platform essentially in a way, or underlying environment, so that it can be a seamless manner for delivering our product by building those infrastructure platforms using automation. And as I said earlier as well, we cannot talk enough about the communication and the collaboration piece. That is why I use the example of the relay race, where it has to have an open communication. You have to have the ability to pivot and be flexible and collaborate with essentially between each other teams to have a seamless delivery of the product or software. Um, we're going to talk. This is one of the frameworks, right? Now, it is important to understand that there are many DevOps frameworks out there, right? You will find that virtually all of them essentially underscore a common theme, and that is the pivotal role of culture and collaboration in achieving DevOps success, right? So, what we're going to do is we're going to essentially very quickly look at comms here and how it aligns with the fundamental principle, right? So, culture essentially encapsulates the spirit of collaboration, the trust, and the dedication to continuous improvement, right? Similar to a high-performing team, right? So that's why I call it the team spirit here, right? Automation, I have mentioned it as robo assistants, essentially that those tools, which brings you efficiency in making sure that the repetitive tasks can be automated, making sure that our teams can essentially, focus on solving problems in a creative manner rather than doing the mundane and the automated tasks or the repetitive tasks in a manual fashion. manual fashion. Um, Lean signifies our commitment to streamlining processes, I would say eliminating inefficiencies and enhancing productivity in there, right? And how can you simplify your workflow by reducing the unnecessary steps, right? Or the waste, I essentially call it, right? Measurement is essentially, I see it as a scoreboard, right? Which allows us to monitor our progress effectively. And last but not the least one here is a sharing, right? Which is essentially a dissemination of that knowledge which you have gathered, those best practices, that tools, the use of those tools, right, among the teams, right, which essentially will foster a, I would say, collaboration or a recipe for DevOps success as such. Now, how do we take it, right? How do we take it and roll it in an organization? That is also one of the things which we see is, right. And this whole the steps I've mentioned, they apply across the whole pipeline of the DevOps, right? We know the different phases: plan, build, deploy, release, operate, monitor, right? We know all of those phases, right? So, and this particular framework applies across all of those phases, right? So the key piece here is that securing the leadership commitment, right, is making sure that that helps in bringing or the cultural transformation, and that sets the way for you, right? Now, education and training will essentially help you in empowering your teams, right, and enable you to essentially take these smaller pilot projects, right, and which will help us, and these automation tools will essentially help us in embracing automation for efficiency, right? And if we move to CI/CD, we'll see that CI/CD pipelines, and I've mentioned it again and again, right, that accelerates your software delivery. That's the heart of the DevOps process here, right? And combined it with robust monitoring, iteration, strong focus on security, that will help us defining the path, right? With the combination of tools and technologies, sharing our support, right? Scalability and adaptability are I see them as an allies in all this case, and which is, and then the measuring success, right? Again, coming back to that performance board here, right? Is a scoreboard here, right? So, and then reporting on that performance scoreboard to our leadership, and which is essentially that we're delivering that value to the commitment we initially received, right? So with these steps, right, what we see is that we can master the DevOps efficiency in a particular organization, right? What it helps us is ensuring the swift, reliable software delivery and unlocking that great business success we have, right? So this is usually, you will see the framework followed across many by many companies across different teams is like, it starts with the leadership commitment, right? That will help you bring that cultural transformation, and then adaptability and evolving that at the end of it, as I say, right, is learning from those feedback loops, learning from that scoreboard, delivering that value, reporting that value, having those KPIs will essentially make sure that we can essentially achieve the success in the DevOps era. Right. So with this slide, from this slide now, essentially, I'm going to move into the cost management topic. I mentioned in the beginning of the agenda here, right, is that what is the role of FinOps in DevOps, right? We talked about that, how cost management essentially is super critical in this era now, right? And often I've seen, and I even got some stickers in one of the conferences which say the number one rule of DevOps is that we don't talk about cloud costs, right? It's a good phrase. It used to be a very common phrase essentially, and we have seen that, right? But what I'm going to talk here is that how can we debunk that notion, right? Is that how the role of FinOps is as critical in any portion of the organization now these days, especially in DevOps, right? And which is usually the unsung hero that makes sure that you got to deliver your software, right, seamlessly or at the speed, whatever is needed, but we can make sure that the costs are essentially managed, right? And we are not wasting costs. We're not making that software product expensive enough, and causing issues with the delivery of the particular product, right? So we're gonna understand a little bit about some of the tactics. And before I do that, right, I want to make sure that we understand what is FinOps, right? I know that word is being thrown here, right? I just brought it up in the let's understand the role of FinOps in DevOps, but I just wanted to give a definition of FinOps here, right? So what you have on the screen is a definition of FinOps on the FinOps Foundation team, which says it's an evolving cloud financial management discipline and cultural practice that enable organizations to get maximum business value by helping engineering, finance, technology, and business teams to collaborate on data-driven spending decisions, right? So one thing you've noticed, if you have noticed here, is that the word collaborate, right? So that word collaboration, again, going back to the same terminology here, right? The culture, the collaboration is the key, is the heart of this whole process, right? Now, the way I see FinOps is essentially you're managing your household budget, right? You want to make sure that where you're spending more money, you look at your credit card bills and make sure that you are spending more money on the food, on the grocery, on gas, on automobile, on electricity, and then you figure out, okay, how can I manage my expenses in much more efficient manner, right? And if we take this in a cloud computing world, right, so we want to understand how we are spending our money in. Are we spending more money on the tools? Are we spending more money on building up resources and keeping those resources up and running all the time when they're not needed? Are we do we have visibility into who owns what portion of the cost in DevOps world, or even in the engineering world, or in the product world, right? Are their dev systems more expensive than the production systems? Are we using the right set of technologies underlying? Are we making sure that we are making appropriate choice of the instance types, instance size, storage type, IOPS, and so on, so on. So there are many things around that, right? So, but the fundamental idea is that you want to make sure that we are using the cloud services efficiently, and we're not wasting money, because that each of that dollar spent or dollar gone into the waste bucket can be used for innovation in other products or in other services. If we look at some of the advanced tactics here, right, these are some of the strategies, as I said, right? FinOps talks a few things on a very high level. If you understand the FinOps framework, it says inform, operate, and operationalize, essentially, or optimize, right? The idea is that inform phase says that you bring visibility, right? This is what I'm talking about, cost allocation strategies, right? We need to understand who owns what portion of the cost, right? Where is this cost going? Are we spending more on building the pipeline? Are we spending more on building the services? Are we spending more on the platform? Are we spending more on the technology itself, right? So that is what the visibility is. And then we talk about the optimization strategies, right? So we look at how can we efficiently utilize our services, and then we talk about operationalization of that. How can we make sure there's a process which can help us streamlining? Some of the tactics I mentioned here, if you think of Splitwise, right, I'm sure many of you or some of you may already have heard about Splitwise, how we use it against our, among our friends or groups, and we split that, which gives us the visibility, who owns how much and who has contributed into the what portion of that expense. Real-time cost forecasting, right? There are tons and tons of tools available today. The moment you write your code, if it's Terraform code or something like that, you will have the ability to see that cost right there while writing your code, and says, okay, if you deploy this piece of the code, you will be spending X amount of dollars or in cloud. Then we have certain cloud discounts available, right? So which is essentially more on a commitment base. Yeah, if you sign up for a particular service for the whole year, you will get a discounted price versus the monthly price. And we see that trend across many generic services outside of cloud, outside in our normal life as well. Dynamic scaling, right? I take it as an example of adaptive cruise in our cars, right? You should have the ability to understand, okay, I need to push on the brakes now, or I need to go faster, right? And our servers should have the ability to scale up or scale out, essentially, depending upon the workloads being changed, depending upon the user demands being changed. FinOps as a code, which is one of the infra cost, is a tool essentially which is available in the market today, right? And that if you integrate that tool, that essentially will give you the ability to have that visibility right at the deployment level of that code. Anomaly detection, in which you figure out trends which are not necessarily usual or normal in any way. And then we have right sizing and architectural decisions, right? Or designs. Think of as a smart home, right? When you ensure that you are only using resources when needed, right? So that's why you have Nest at home today, or any other smart devices, right? So these are the capabilities. These are some of the advanced tactics we can use in our DevOps world today, which will essentially make sure that we are meeting one of the foundational principles of cost optimization and able to deliver a product at a much more seamless level. With that slide, I'm going to pivot to another topic now, which was mentioned in the agenda, which was around the hybrid cloud. So we're going to talk about a little bit about the hybrid cloud, right? The hybrid cloud, what is hybrid cloud? And I want to make sure that we understand when we say hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, right? I've often seen these two terms being overlapped or interchanged a lot of the times, even though these are two distinct terms and they're different use cases, which essentially apply in many of the scenarios. So hybrid cloud works by combining the resources and services from two or more separate computing environments, right? Now, which means in this case, we have one as a public cloud provider, Amazon, Google, Azure, or any other cloud provider like Oracle. And then we have some of the other workloads essentially running in a private cloud setup, right? Or in an on-prem setup, right? So when you combine these two, right, either an on-prem or private with the public cloud setup, that essentially becomes your hybrid cloud setup. In multi-cloud scenarios, right, we have use cases where some organizations or some workloads are required to be, or not required necessarily, but you could deploy those workloads essentially across multi-cloud. So you could run it on both public cloud providers, which is your public cloud Amazon, and you're running it in public cloud AWS, right? So I just wanted to give a very high-level distinction between these two terminologies we have often seen being interchanged, right? And then we will talk about some of these use cases, right? So why do we need hybrid cloud, and how can essentially DevOps be helping in all of those pieces, right? So if you look at it, right, and some of the examples I put on the slide here is like hybrid cloud. There are many use cases in many industries, especially I would see in the financial or the banking industries, where they do not have the ability to essentially completely move out of that controlled environment out into the public cloud setup due to security or compliance reasons, right? So what happens at the end of the day is that we have to figure out what our strategic workload placement, right? So we have to figure out how can we make sure that our some of the workloads essentially which are critical to our business can be strategically placed where they would perform the best, right? And that's where the hybrid cloud essentially offers the flexibility to run some of the environments in public cloud. It could be development and test environments, right? So in public cloud, while we keep the sensitive data in-house, right, which is essentially in a private cloud or an on-prem environment. Now, what that gives us both agility and control, right? So the agility is being achieved by taking those dev and test environments, or by taking the capabilities or making the use of capabilities of public cloud, and having control by keeping your sensitive data in-house or in the on-prem side of the world, right? Data backup and disaster recovery is often seen as a common example where many organizations would keep their backups in a public cloud, and even they run the whole workload, and just to make sure that they are ready from a disaster recovery perspective or business contingency plans perspective, right? We have seen seasonal workloads, right, where some of the organizations will essentially often use the scale capabilities of the public cloud, right, in addition to their on-prem or private cloud capabilities, and would make the best use of the hybrid cloud in that scenario. We have seen data synchronization a lot of time. It's a vital aspect, right, where we can make sure that DevOps essentially helps us in making sure that we have a seamless data movement between different environments, so that we are always working on an up-to-date information or an up-to-date artifact as such, right? Hybrid cloud essentially also would allow you to automate the deployment of applications across both public and private cloud, right? And now that is where, as I said, right, some of the key things we talked about: speed, rapid delivery, reliable delivery, right, security, right, all of those pieces. Now that's why we touched on those foundational pieces of the DevOps elements, right, that how they would help us in achieving and making sure that our applications can be deployed or can be delivered even in the scenarios of the hybrid cloud structure, right? And regulatory compliances is often seen as one of the major reasons, right? Why it is essentially crucial to protect your applications and data throughout the life cycle. And some organizations, because of the compliance nature, they have to keep the data locally in their on-prem or their private cloud centers, and they will use other capabilities of the public cloud to scale up to the other environments. These are some of the challenges in modern DevOps. We have already talked about some of those in some level, right? And how the need of the DevOps and the things I talked about in that section essentially will help us in solving these challenges, which is scalability, security, and compliance. The explosion of microservices now, how would we be able to manage all of that stuff? Some of the containers and orchestration technologies we have available at hand, and finally the cost optimization or the resource optimization at last, right? Now, this is the next or the last topic essentially for today, which is the next gen tools, right? I just want to say a few things here, right? In the world of DevOps, right? So tools are essentially the backbone of efficiency and productivity, right? They enable us to automate, streamline, and orchestrate our processes. But key thing to remember is that it's not just about using the latest and greatest tool, right? It is about choosing the right ones for our specific needs, right? So when we incorporate DevOps tools, it is very imperative, crucial to understand and align them with our organizational goals and culture, right? Making sure that we have a clear strategy. What are we trying to achieve with these tools? Are we looking at efficiency, reliability, scalability, right? Security, right? And also, and always, we need to think about the integration, right? These tools should work together. They should work harmoniously. That's how we will be able to have that relay race we talked in the beginning, right? So that it can create a cohesive tool chain, right? And I would say at last, finally, or I would say keep in mind that the tools would not alone guarantee success, right? They're most effective when combined with a culture of collaboration, continuous learning, and commitment to excellence. So as we explore these tools, right, it is good that it's not just that having them in our I would say arsenal, but how can we utilize them to achieve our goals and make sure that a software delivery process itself can be streamlined and deliver value to the organization and to your customers or our customers, right? So I'm not going to go through any of these tools essentially here, right? And again, this is not a whole list of the tools. I just put together some of those tools I'm aware of, some of the tools I've seen in past, some of the tools which are most commonly used across the board by different organizations, right? But I'm pretty sure there are many more tools available across each of these sections, right? And some of these on the left side are the security tools, which helps us in essentially scanning at the container level or doing penetration testing and so on. And I also mentioned some of the FinOps cost management tools, which essentially gives us the visibility and I would say opportunities in terms of right sizing and all of those pieces. Right. So with that, I conclude the presentation, and I really appreciate everybody being here and listening to this. And have a good day, everybody. Thank you.